Hello, friends. Today, I want to convince you that circus is more authentic than almost any other art form. And you might be skeptical about this because circus is about 90% glitter and spectacle, and we call the things we do tricks. So how can that possibly be as authentic as other art forms? But I'm not the only person who thinks that this might very well be true, so hear me out on this one. If you have spent any time on the circus internet, you have probably heard the quote, "Damn everything but the circus." Now, side note, finding the right citations for all of this was actually shockingly difficult. But I think this line in particular comes from an E. E. Cummings essay entitled I and Now and Him. Interestingly enough, it does frequently get embellished into a full prose poem as follows. Damn everything but the circus. Damn everything that is grim, dull, motionless, unrisking, inward turning. Damn everything that won't get into the circle, that won't enjoy, that won't throw its heart into the tension, surprise, fear, and delight of the circus, the round world, the full existence. But the whole poem, which frequently gets attributed to E. E. Cummings because of that line, damn everything but the circus, I don't think is actually him. It doesn't show up in I and Now and Him. Where it does show up is in the description to this wonderfully over-the-top psychedelic alphabet book by Sister Mary Corita Kent entitled Damn Everything But the Circus. So I think it is hers. And now that I have seen the book, Damn Everything But the Circus, I am enviously eyeing it for my own bookshelf. But that's another story. Anyway, while I do think that this exhortation to be like an acrobat and throw yourself recklessly into life is a wonderful piece of life advice, it's not necessarily what E. E. Cummings was actually saying when he first wrote Damn Everything But the Circus. And while this broad fortune favors the brave kind of vibe is probably a good thing to have in your life, it's not necessarily about art or authenticity, and certainly not both of those with a capital A, and those are the things that are currently keeping me up at night, wondering about my place in the world. So let's talk about what Cummings was actually saying in I and Now and Him. Damn Everything But the Circus, in its original context, is shortly followed by this line. The average painter, sculptor, poet, composer, playwright is a person who cannot leap through a hoop from the back of a galloping horse, make people laugh with a clown's mouth, orchestrate 20 lions. This definitely wasn't the only time that Cummings rated circus acrobats as more artistic than artists themselves. In a wonderful piece in Vanity Fair, he continues on at length. The present writer wishes to state, 1. That an extremely intimate connection exists between Concaliano's forward somersault from and to a wire in midair and Homer's Odyssey. 2. That a sure method for understanding Igor Stravinsky's contrapuntal edifice Le Sacre du Printemps is to study the voluminous precision and fugal delicacy of Mr. Ringling's ponderous pachyderms under the direction of the greatest of all animal trainers. 3. That El Greco in painting and Ernest Clark in his triple somersaulting, double twisting, and reverse flights through space give strikingly similar performances. And 4. That the fluent technique of seals and sea lions comprises certain untranslatable idioms, certain innate flexions, which astonishingly resemble the spiritual essence of poetry. Now, I want to throw out a few notes at this juncture. The first is that he is not talking about contemporary circus, not only because E. E. Cummings predates any of the even hints at contemporary circus companies by several decades. But mostly because this was like, honestly, he loves pop culture. He loves Coney Island. He specifically refers to P.T. Barnum. He's intentionally talking about traditional American circus, and he means it in all of its sideshow, no plot, no metaphor, just do the trick, throw more glitter at it, shock and awe glory. And I think that that's really significant, especially since he's also not saying that, like, well, circus, if it just matures, it has the potential to become art. If it would calm down a little bit and lose the glitter obsession and release the elephants, it could become art like ballet. No, he's saying that already, in its most basic form, P.T. Barnum's traditional American circus is as or more artistically worthy and artistically meaningful and as true to art as absolutely the best works of the Western canon. Now, that is a delightfully strong claim. I love it. He might kind of be trolling us a little bit because it is E.E. Cummings, but even if he's trolling us a little bit, I love that. Now, because the other thing to note is the flip side of this. This is coming from E.E. Cummings, which is like peak postmodern, difficult to read and interpret, painting with letters poetry. And I think that there's maybe another important caveat here, because in Cummings' work, what he was doing was throwing out the rules. Does grammar get you down? Cool, don't use it. Is punctuation just getting in the way? Great, throw it away. Or throw more of it in, whatever works. If you want to end the line in the middle of a word, or if you want to make up your own words, or if you want to ignore all of the rules of sort of rhythm and rhyme and scansion, or if you want to really just do anything, do it. But do it in service of communication. Here's my favorite Cummings poem, probably because it's one of the easiest to understand what he's actually getting at. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful because everything is coming towards a very specific point. 3 of the 4 lines look like the number 1. And the shape of the poem as a whole on the page looks like the number 1. And the word of the entire poem is loneliness. And all of it is pointing at this one very clear message. And I think that's what's at the base of a lot of what makes Cummings very difficult to understand, because everything has multiple layers. But also maybe his love of the circus. It's about throwing out the rules. If the rules don't serve the point, then why even have them? So I think that part of why Cummings is so outspoken in his love of circus is actually coming from the same place as this dedication to throwing out the rules that don't really matter. Part of why we say that circus isn't real art or meaningful art is that it's fun. It's the kind of thing kids like. It's direct. But why can't art be stuff that kids like? Why can't it be fun? Why can't it be direct? And he actually says almost exactly this at the end of the Vanity Fair piece. This being so, our 3-ring circus is art. For to contend that the spectacle in question is not an authentic manifestation of beauty is as childish as to dismiss the circus on the ground that it is childish is idiotic. But if we can break the rules and call circus art in service of communication, and we're talking about the circus that has no plot or metaphor in it, what is circus actually communicating? And this is where it gets real fun, because he points out one of the probably defining characteristics of circus arts as a whole, which is to say something that is true for the vast majority of circus acts and not true for almost any other kind of performing art, is that the stakes of the act, the goal of the act, is utterly clear at all times in circus art because the person is actually doing the thing. And furthermore, that in many cases, especially for acrobatic acts, the stakes literally could not be higher. And this is exactly what he's talking about earlier on in the Vanity Fair piece when he says this. Within the big top, as nowhere else on earth, is to be found actuality. Living players play with living. There are no tears produced by onion oil and Mr. Nevin's rosary, no pasteboard hovels and papier-mâché palaces, no cuts, retakes, or NGs, and no curtain calls after suicide. At positively every performance, Death himself lurks, glides, struts, breathes, is. I think this is fundamentally true. Every time I climb my apparatus, I am taking my own life into my hands. Now, I'm well trained, so I know what I'm doing, and I practice and perform on engineered systems that I know can withstand many times the amount of force that I'm likely to exert. So it's a managed risk. But people have died during cirque shows. Things go wrong. There is no amount of training and technical savvy that can actually completely remove that risk. And so, yeah, every time I or any other acrobat does a stunt, they are saying, yeah, I might die, but it'll be beautiful. And that's what life is. And so taking that one step farther, what's a more authentic representation and expression of the beauty of life being more important than death? Alas, poor Yorick? Or someone firing themselves out of a cannon in a traditional American circus show? Only one of those people is actually looking at their own death and is actually making something beautiful out of it and is actually choosing life. And it isn't the actor. And so E. Cummings argues elsewhere in the article, this is the greatest purpose of art, is to create beauty that transcends death. And if that is the case, then there can be no more authentic representation of art than someone doing a loop-de-loop on a motorcycle. I would embellish this in a few ways, and the first is to note that there is a large amount of pretense that actually goes into a traditional circus act, but that it's usually working the other way. So the extent to which a play is pretend acts to amplify the stakes, to remind the audience of, who we're supposed to be rooting for and what their goals are. But in a circus act, that's obvious. You just don't want to die. And the pretense and the spectacle sort of serves the purpose of downplaying the risk of death. If I have succeeded as an aerialist, I have allowed myself for a very brief period of time to forget about gravity. And I've allowed the audience, through me, to do the same thing. To forget for a moment that we can all fall. And that's a pretty meaningful thing. It feeds into this urban legend or sort of story that I think originated in a 1951 circus memoir from a fire eater, where they talk about what's the trick to eating fire. What's the technique? What makes it safe? What prevents you from just burning your mouth? And the answer is there is no trick. You just have to be okay with burning your mouth. And whether or not that is true of fire eating, I do not eat fire, so I don't personally know. I think that it resonates pretty strongly with what I know of aerial straps, for one. When I was teaching, I would get a ton of students asking me, when do my wrists stop hurting? Because you're putting a huge amount of pressure on your wrists when you're hanging from one hand by a knot that's tied around a wrist. And the answer is like, well, I mean, I got this a few days ago. It's not focused. Can it focus? You can't really see it, but it hurt. It still hurts. It'll always hurt. The pro straps artists that I know, like, grease their wrists with chapstick because they're still getting cut up from it. You just have to decide that it's worth it. You just do, because sometimes the pain and the risk of death is worth it. But we don't show that to the audience. To the audience, we want it to look effortless. Second, I think this positioning of circus as something that breaks all of the rules only works from the outside of the community. In a traditional circus act, there are so many rules, and they're really rules that are worth pushing back on and worth doing away with. Why is it that bodies like mine, which are pale and small and slender, are really conceived of as better than darker or more size non-conforming bodies? Why are straight legs so important? Why are pointed toes so important? Why do we have to have ballet hands? Like, none of it actually is serving an artistic point, but it is the structure and the rules of the form. And the people who are really pushing back on this are definitely people in the contemporary circus community, and their work is incredibly valid and fits in with this postmodern view of art as including even traditional circus. There's actually, as a side note, this really wonderfully deconstructionist idea for a circus act, and I don't know if I've seen it somewhere or if I've just like dreamed it up, which is for the full first half of the act, you're getting all of your cues from the music. You can tell what's impressive because there's a drum roll and a musical swell and the lighting goes crazy. And the artist actually doesn't even need to be on stage until the second half of the act for their big finale and bow. And I think that would be like the single most contemporary circus act that could possibly be done, and I love it. Third, and very much as an aside, I think that this kind of positions circus interestingly in an online ecosystem, because one of the unique things about many online art forms is that they're incredibly authentic. You see the person actually doing the thing on a camera with low production values in a direct way that you can really empathize with. And if we're sort of positioning circus as this especially authentic art form because it consists in its entirety of confronting death and making something beautiful out of it, then it shares something really interesting with the online ecosystem, especially since online content generally isn't nearly as pretentious as, I don't know, what I'm making right now. It can often be lowbrow, and people very frequently question whether it is worthwhile to call it art, just like they do with traditional circus. Finally, I want to bring this back to how do we define art? Because in that portion of the video, there was a little bit of sleight of hand going on. And I think it's worth querying, is all of art about creating beauty that transcends death? Because I think that there's a lot of very worthwhile art that isn't necessarily about beauty at all. Much of it is beautiful, but some of it is ugly, and some of it is distressing and still very worthwhile. And it seems to me that it's much more about authentic communication. And there are absolutely some things that can be very authentically communicated in circus art or by direct demonstration of the thing. But there are some things that can't. And one of the big ones is that while alive, we can never truly experience death. We can only watch it from the outside. And to bring in another depressing postmodernist, because I am a giant pedant, Tom Stoppard really talks about this specifically in relation to theater in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And there's this scene where Guildenstern confronts the player and says, after you present so many fake deaths again and again and again in all of these tragedies where every single character dies and then stands up for a curtain call, how can you expect the audience to actually believe in those deaths? And the player actually says, on the contrary, that's all they do believe. And Stoppard plays with this in sort of myriad ways, positioning Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's deaths, which are real in the context of the play, as more real than the deaths of the player. But shortly after that, there's a scene where Guildenstern stabs the player, and the player appears to die only to jump up. And it creates the situation in which you as the audience, the first time you see the play, and Guildenstern as a character, cannot differentiate between the pretended death of an actor and the real death of a character. And so all of these layers of what is real and what is not are sort of overlapping to serve the broader point, which is that we can't know what death is. We can only see it from the outside. And so when we see it in a play, we know the actor isn't dying, but the character has. And it allows us as audience members to tap into truly authentic emotions of grief. And so I think, oddly enough, while circus arts may be a most authentic way of expressing beauty in transcendence of death, one of the few things that circus arts really can't express is death itself. So thanks for joining me on this incredibly pedantic journey into a few postmodernists. I hope you enjoyed it at least half as much as I did, because I love this stuff. I am a gigantic pedant. And also, if you just want to talk about stuff like this, let me know in the comments below. I love to chat about it. Until next time, bye for now.